So we talked previously about writing text in an R Markdown document and some different ways to format text in an R Markdown document. Now we're going to talk about integrating code into an R Markdown document. And this is really the main feature that makes R Markdown useful, is that we can combine code with text to create little reports. So I'm going to create a new line down at the bottom here. And in order to insert some code, what we call a code chunk, into my document, I'm going to click this +C button up at the top and then select R. And that's going to cause this gray box to appear here in my document. And in between these apostrophe symbols, so in line 55, is where I can start typing my code in R. So again, to do that, you click +C and then select R. So let's say hypothetically, I wanted to just try some things out. I wanted to maybe do some math. So let's try 5 times 5. There are a couple ways to run this. The most obvious way is to click this little play sign here, which is going to run the code chunk. So if I click that, it gives me my output down here, 25. I can also see output down here in the console if I want to, but a lot of times when I'm working in R Markdown, I tend to kind of make the console small because I can see most of what I need to see in the little summary here. If for some reason I don't want to see that right now, I can also exit out here. So I can click the play button to run it. I can also use my regular old hotkeys, so Control-Enter will run the current line. That still works perfectly fine, so you can do that as well. So here's some math. Let's do another code chunk. Let's try looking at the empty cars data set. So here I'm loading the data set and I'm inspecting it a couple different ways. So if I hit play, it gives me a couple different output frames that I can toggle through. So here's the head of the empty cars data set. And I can use this arrow to kind of scroll through the different columns. And then here's a summary of the empty cars data set. So let's say we wanted to work on the problem set. There's one question on the problem set, question 6, where we're using R. So this is a great use case for a situation where we might want to use R Markdown. So question 6 says that I need to use the Airbnb NYC dataset. So let's kind of get set up first. So I'm going to make a new heading and say question 6. And then I'm going to make a subheading that says load in the data. And then under that subheading, I'm going to insert a code chunk. And in this code chunk, I'm going to load in my data. So I'm going to call it Airbnb _NYC, do my arrow and do read.csv, parentheses, and quotation marks. And now I need the file path to that data. So actually, I'm going to go get the data real quick. So on our Canvas site, data folder. All right, here it is, Airbnb NYC. I'm going to download that. And now this is in my downloads folder. So I can get my file path to that file. And if you're on Mac, this process might look a little different. But the goal is to get that file path. And then I'm going to hit play. Watch when I hit play in my environment, we'll hopefully see the data set pop up. And sure enough, here it is. And I could also double check that. Maybe on a new line, I would do head. And here it's giving me the first 6 rows of that data. It's formatted in a way that's kind of difficult to read, so I do have to use this arrow to scroll over to see, like, here's the name of the Airbnb listing, here's the host ID, the host name, the neighborhood group, etc. All right, so I've got my data. I'm working on question 6. I loaded in the data. Let's see what's next. All right, download the data set, read it into RStudio, then answer the questions below. We will use the price variable as our DV of interest and try to determine what factors impact the prices of Airbnbs in NYC. Generate some summary statistics regarding price, including maximum, minimum, and mean. All right, so part A looks pretty straightforward. I need to use the price variable, this guy right here, to generate some summary statistics. So I'm going to create another subheading and say part A, and then I'm going to insert some code. And let's just do a summary of the price variable. If I run this, it gives me the minimum. The mean is here, 152, and the max is, apparently there's an Airbnb that costs $10,000 in this data set in New York City. So that would be enough to answer the question, but just to further demonstrate, the advantage of our Markdown, I'll add some text down here and I'll say, as seen in the summary above, the minimum price is 0, the maximum price is 10K, and the mean price is 152.70. And let's pause here and knit this document just so you can see kind of where we're at. All right, so I've got my heading, I've got some text. Here's all the stuff we did before, working on formatting different text. Here's our image. And then here's where we've started doing some code. So this is how it appears in the HTML document. Here we can see 5 times 5. Here's the answer. Here's our work with empty cars. Here's the output for that. Here's some more empty cars. Here's my heading for question 6, subheading, loading in the data. Here's part A. Here's my summary command, and then here's my little text that I wrote explaining my part A. So let's keep going with it. Let's try part B. So I'll do another subheading. And let's see what I'm asking here. All right, we will use the neighborhood group variable as our primary IV of interest. Identify and list out the 5 neighborhoods that are present. Based on what you know about NYC, what neighborhoods do you expect to be more or less pricey? Okay, so this is great because here it's asking us to do something in R, and then here it's asking us to just think about something. So that's a perfect use case for R Markdown. So let's start by trying to figure out this neighborhood group variable and what's contained within that. So I've got my part B subheading. I'm going to insert a new chunk of code. And let's try doing a summary of the neighborhood group variable. Now, if I hit play, it tells me that this is just characters. This is just text in this variable. So just out of curiosity, I'm going to try doing head. Okay, and I can see, oh, it is text, it is characters, but these are actually categories, right? These are neighborhoods which constitute different categories where Airbnbs can be located. So this is a really good case where I might want to convert this variable to a factor, which is something we've discussed a little bit in the course. So I'm going to get rid of this head command. And then before my summary command, I'm going to type neighborhood group arrow and then as dot factor and then neighborhood group again. So this line is going to convert the neighborhood group variable to a factor. And then now that we're going to do a summary, but we're going to do a summary of the variable after it has been converted to a factor. So I'm going to hit play. And this is a much more useful summary. It's telling me there's 1,000 Airbnbs in the Bronx, 20K in Brooklyn, 21K in Manhattan, etc. So that looks pretty useful. And I've answered the first part of the question, which was to list out the 5 neighborhoods. Let's answer this part now. Based on what you know about NYC, which neighborhoods do you expect to be more or less pricey? So I'll scroll down a little and I'm just going to type some text for this. So based on my limited knowledge, NYC, I expect that Manhattan will be extremely expensive because it is the downtown area with many exciting tourist attractions, right? And one quick note, I'm going to knit the document in a second, but one quick note about the code here. You can still include comments in your code. So for example, maybe I want to add a comment here and say, convert to factor, and then I'll add summarize new factor variable. I can add my little comments here. Comments are still useful, definitely still useful, but they're maybe a little bit less necessary when you're working in R Markdown because you're chunking your code into kind of little pieces and you're interspersing regular text in between your code. And so it's almost like your regular text that you're typing can function as the explanation of your code rather than having to type a lot of comments. So use them as much as you want, but just understand that one of the great advantages of R Markdown is that you can explain your code using actual text that's much more readable than a comment. And so maybe you don't need quite as many comments as you would in a regular R script. So let's knit this. All right, here's my part A. Here's my new part B that I did. I've got my comments and then I've got my little answer to the question here. And so I could keep going in this vein. But what I want to show you now is not from the problem set. I want to show you briefly how to make plots in R Markdown. It's exactly what you would expect. So I'll add a new heading, creating a plot in R Markdown. And then under that heading, I'm going to insert another code chunk. And within this code chunk, all I have to do is type the code I would be using to generate a plot. So I'm going to create a plot using ggplot. So I need to load the ggplot package there with the library command. And then let's say I want to actually plot the neighborhoods in this data set and then the average price of an Airbnb in each neighborhood. So I'm going to ggplot command and then my data, comma, AES. Let's put neighborhood group on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. And then at the end here, I'm going to add a plus geom bar because I think a bar plot makes sense for this. And stat equals summary. In the past, we've tended to use stat equals identity, which indicates that we want the exact value that's in the data set to be plotted. Here I'm using stat equals summary because I don't want the exact values to be plotted. I want ggplot to take an average, so to take the average price based on neighborhood group, and this summary stat will do that. It will take an average. So let's try this out and see. And if I hit play, I can see here, here's my plot. So here's neighborhood group. And sure enough, Manhattan, the average price looks like it's almost $200 a night. In second place, we have Brooklyn. And it looks like the Bronx is the cheapest. You could get an Airbnb for under $100 a night in the Bronx. So plots are pretty easy. You just do it as you normally would. And if I knit, I can see my plot right here. So one more quick thing I want to talk about with code in R Markdown, and I'll show another cheat sheet real quick here. So this is actually the official R Markdown cheat sheet from Posit, the company that makes RStudio. And so I'll link to this, but what I want to focus on right now is this right here. So there are some arguments that you can add into your code chunks to help determine what gets displayed in your final document. So this plot is a good example. Let's say that I was presenting this Airbnb information to like the New York City Council, and the city council really doesn't care about ggplot. They don't want to see my code. All they want to see is this graph, right? So I would like to find a way to not show this code and only show the graph. So I can do that using these handy little option parameters. And so for example, this echo option, it looks like what it does is it displays code in the output document. And normally it's true, but if I told R I want echo to be false, that would tell R, don't display the code in the output document. So going over here to the code chunk where we create the graph, if I put my cursor inside these curly brackets right here at the top, and I do a comma and say echo equals false, this is telling R, don't include this code chunk right here. So watch what happens when I knit. I don't really like here is a warning message and another weird message. So let me look at the cheat sheet again. All right, warning. Warning is normally true. Display code warnings in document. Okay, so if I set warning to false, maybe it'll eliminate that warning message. So going back to here, I'm going to add another comma and say warning equals false. And I'm going to knit again. So I'll add one more thing here. Knit. All right, this is what I wanted. So I've got my heading, and then I've just got my plot and nothing else. No warning messages, no code, no error messages. So these little arguments can be added inside the curly brackets at the top in order to control the way that this gets displayed in your output document. And that's kind of a handy tip. I typically have to look them up. I don't have them memorized. And sometimes I have to play around and knit a few different times before I get exactly what I want. But it's good to know about these.